Ryan Calloway felt his world crumbling around him as his 3-year-old son Hillary convulsed in his arms. Desperation clung to every breath. Nothing, not wealth nor influence, could calm his son's violent shaking. That was, until a poor black teenager from the back of the plane stepped forward and did something no one expected. Ryan Calloway, the billionaire CEO of Calloway Enterprises, sat frozen in his first-class seat, his face pale with fear. His son Hillary, a bright-eyed boy of 3, had been convulsing uncontrollably for hours on their private flight to London. The plush surroundings of the jet, the luxury that normally soothed his worries, now felt suffocating. Despite every resource at his disposal, from top-tier doctors on speed dial to emergency medical kits, nothing worked. His child's seizures were getting worse, and Ryan's professional poise was slipping away, replaced by a panic he couldn't control. His frustration mounted with each failed attempt to calm Hillary. The passengers around him began whispering, their eyes sharp with judgment. Ryan's desperation became more palpable with every moment. Flight attendants offered suggestions, all of which failed. Even the pilot made an announcement, subtly directing his concern toward Ryan's predicament, as if to remind him that everyone's comfort mattered, except his own. Just as Ryan's breaking point approached, something unthinkable happened. From the economy class, a 17-year-old boy, Dave Morrison, walked up without hesitation. His clothes were worn yet clean. His eyes, calm and resolute, didn't waver as he approached the billionaire. "May I?" he asked, his voice cutting through the tension like a breath of fresh air. Ryan, at the end of his rope, barely registered his words. Too exhausted and overwhelmed to refuse, he simply nodded. And then, in a miraculous moment, Dave took control. He gently moved Hillary, applying a technique so calm and steady that Ryan couldn't help but watch in disbelief. In mere seconds, the convulsions ceased. The noise of the cabin faded as 200 passengers held their breath, staring at the teenager in awe. Ryan sat in stunned silence, his heart racing with disbelief. How could a stranger, a teenager from a different world, have done what his wealth and expertise couldn't? As Hillary's breath steadied and peace settled over them, Ryan felt his entire world shift. He had no idea that this unexpected intervention would mark the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. But before we begin, please subscribe, like this video, and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I hope this makes you believe in kindness. Now let's start. Ryan glanced at Dave, his confusion evident. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The teenager smiled, a quiet confidence in his eyes. "My baby sister had seizures. Took me years to figure out what worked." Ryan stared at him, trying to process what had just happened. Hillary lay still in his arms now, her breathing steady and even. The tremors had stopped. The violent jerking that had terrified him moments ago had simply ceased. He looked down at his son's peaceful face, then back up at Dave, struggling to reconcile what he was witnessing with everything he thought he knew. "Years," Ryan repeated, his mind racing. "But you can't be more than 17. 18 next month," Dave said, settling back into his seat but keeping his eyes on Hillary. "Started when Maya was 2. I was 12. He spoke matter-of-factly, as if what he'd just done was the most natural thing in the world. "Doctors gave us medications, sure, but they didn't always work fast enough. And when you're in the moment, when your baby sister is seizing on the kitchen floor and your mom's at her second job and the ambulance is 20 minutes away." He trailed off, shrugging. "You learn what works." The cabin had grown remarkably quiet. Ryan became aware of the eyes on them, dozens of passengers who had witnessed the entire scene. The woman across the aisle who had complained so bitterly about the noise was now silent, her face pale. The business executive who had suggested they move to the cargo hold sat motionless, staring. Even the flight attendants stood frozen in the galley, their earlier panic replaced by something resembling reverence. Dave seemed oblivious to the attention. He leaned forward slightly, his focus entirely on Hillary. "The key is the pressure points," he explained, his voice low and measured. "There's spots on the neck, the wrists. If you know where to press, how hard, you can sometimes interrupt the electrical storm in the brain. Not always, but sometimes. Learned it from this old nurse in my building, Mrs. Patterson. She used to work in the ER before her knees gave out." Ryan found himself leaning in, absorbing every word. The scientific part of his brain wanted to question it, to demand peer-reviewed studies and clinical trials. But the father in him, the part that had just watched his son stop seizing for the first time in hours, could only feel a profound, overwhelming gratitude. "Why didn't the doctors tell me about this?" Ryan asked, his voice cracking slightly. Dave met his eyes with an understanding that seemed far beyond his years. "Because it's not in their textbooks. It's street medicine, man. The stuff you learn when you can't afford to wait for appointments or specialists." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "My neighborhood, West Baltimore. We got one clinic for about 5,000 people. You learn to handle things yourself, or you don't make it." The plane hit a patch of turbulence, but no one seemed to notice. Ryan adjusted his grip on Hillary, who remained blessedly still. He studied Dave's face, really seeing him for the first time. The threadbare jacket that had seemed suspicious before now told a different story. The worn sneakers. The backpack that probably contained everything he owned of value. This wasn't a troublemaker or a threat. This was a young man who had been forged by circumstances Ryan could barely imagine. "I have 3 younger siblings," Dave continued, unprompted. His voice carried a weight that made Ryan's chest tighten. "Maya, she's 7 now. Then there's Deshaun, he's 5, and little Jamal just turned 3. Mom works doubles at the nursing home, sometimes triples. Dad's not in the picture. So it's on me, you know? I'm the one who makes sure they eat, get to school, stay safe. I'm the one who's there when things go wrong." Ryan thought of his own childhood, private schools, summer camps, a family doctor who made house calls. The contrast was staggering. "You're raising them," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Somebody has to. Dave's jaw tightened slightly. "Maya's seizures, they started out of nowhere. Scared me half to death the first time. Called 911, but by the time they got there, it was over. Happened again a week later. Then 3 days after that. The doctors at the free clinic, they tried their best, but the medications made her sick, made her slow. She couldn't focus in school. Couldn't be herself." He looked down at his hands. Strong hands, Ryan noticed, with calluses that spoke of hard work. "So I started researching. Library computers, medical journals when I could access them online, talking to anyone who'd share what they knew. Mrs. Patterson, she was a godsend. Taught me things they don't teach in first aid classes. Showed me how to read a body, how to sense what it needs." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into London. The cabin stirred slightly, passengers reaching for seatbelts and belongings, but the bubble around Ryan and Dave remained intact. "I don't know how to thank you," Ryan said, and the inadequacy of the words made him wince. "How did you thank someone for giving you back your child? For providing hope where there had been none?" Dave shook his head. "Don't need thanks. Just—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Just remember that help can come from anywhere. From anyone. Even from people who don't look like they should be able to help." The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and the cabin erupted in scattered applause. Not for the landing, Ryan realized with a start, but for them. For Dave. The teenager ducked his head, embarrassed by the attention, but Ryan saw the flash of pride in his eyes. Pride earned, not given. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Ryan made a decision. This encounter, this miracle on Flight 237, was not going to end when they deplaned. He didn't know exactly what form it would take, but he knew with absolute certainty that Dave had just become a permanent part of their lives. Some meetings were accidents. Some were fate. This, Ryan thought as he watched Dave gather his meager belongings, was destiny. The customs line at Heathrow stretched endlessly before them, but Ryan barely noticed. Hillary dozed peacefully against his shoulder, the seizure medications finally taking hold now that the episode had passed. Dave stood beside them, his battered backpack slung over one shoulder, seeming content to wait in silence. Ryan couldn't stop the questions forming in his mind. This teenager had just demonstrated knowledge that had eluded some of the best pediatric neurologists in Boston. How was that possible? "Tell me more about Maya," Ryan said finally, breaking the comfortable quiet between them. "How often does she have seizures now?" Dave shifted his weight, considering. "Maybe once every few months. Used to be twice a week. The pressure point technique helps, but it's more than that. I figured out her triggers: certain foods, not enough sleep, stress. We keep a journal. Track everything." He pulled out his phone, an older model with a cracked screen, and scrolled through notes. "See? Here's the last 6 months. Date, time, duration, what she ate that day, how much she slept. Patterns, you know? Once you see the patterns, you can prevent a lot of them." Ryan stared at the meticulously kept records, his medical researcher's mind immediately recognizing the value of such detailed documentation. "This is extraordinary," he breathed. "Do you share this with her doctors?" "When we can get appointments." Dave pocketed the phone. "But mostly, I just handle it. Cheaper that way. And faster." They shuffled forward in line. Ryan noticed several passengers from their flight still watching Dave with barely concealed curiosity. The teenager seemed oblivious, or perhaps just accustomed to being observed. "What about your mother?" Ryan asked. "She must be grateful for your help." Something flickered across Dave's face, pride mixed with something heavier. Exhaustion, maybe, or resignation. "Mama does her best. She works at Sunrise Senior Care, 6 days a week. Sometimes 7 when they need her. CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant. She wanted to be an RN, even got accepted to a program once, but—" He trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. "Life gets in the way, you know." Ryan thought of his own mother, who had pursued her passions without ever worrying about money or time. Who had traveled, painted, written poetry simply because she wanted to. The contrast made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. "And you," he pressed gently. "What do you want to do?" Dave's eyes lit up, transforming his face. "Medicine. For real. I want to be a doctor, or maybe a physician's assistant. I've been taking community college classes at night, anatomy, physiology, whatever I can afford. Got a 4.0 so far." He said it without boasting, just stating fact. "But it's slow going. Between work and the kids and everything else." "Where do you work?" Ryan asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Warehouse district, loading trucks. Night shift, midnight to 8. Pays $11.50 an hour." Dave noticed Ryan's expression and smiled wryly. "I know it's not much. But it's better than minimum wage, and they don't ask too many questions about scheduling. Lets me be there when the kids get home from school." Ryan did the mental math automatically. $11.50 an hour, 8-hour shifts, maybe 5 nights a week if Dave was lucky. Less than $500 a week before taxes. For a household of 5 people. "When do you sleep?" The question escaped before Ryan could stop it. Dave shrugged. "Couple hours here and there. Sleep's overrated anyway." They reached the customs desk. The officer glanced at their passports, stamped them perfunctorily, and waved them through. As they walked toward baggage claim, Ryan found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about intelligence, about capability, about worth. He had spent his entire adult life in universities and research facilities, surrounded by people with multiple degrees and impressive credentials. Yet here was this teenager with a cracked phone and worn-out shoes, who had taught himself more practical medical knowledge than most medical students possessed, who kept detailed patient journals and identified seizure triggers through nothing but observation and determination, who carried the weight of an entire family on shoulders that should have been worried about prom dates and college applications. Ryan had assumed Dave would be just another unqualified stranger on the plane. Someone to tolerate, perhaps to tip generously afterward as a gesture of gratitude. He had been spectacularly, humblingly wrong. "Dave," he said as they waited by the luggage carousel, "I'd like to talk to you more. About everything. Would you have dinner with us tonight? My treat." The teenager hesitated, uncertainty crossing his face. "I don't know, man. I should probably—" "Please," Ryan interrupted. "I insist. You saved my son. The least I can do is buy you a decent meal." Dave's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. He laughed, embarrassed. "Yeah, okay. That sounds good." Ryan smiled, but his mind was already racing ahead, forming plans he didn't yet fully understand. This conversation wasn't ending at dinner. It was only just beginning. The hotel suite overlooked Hyde Park, all floor-to-ceiling windows and understated luxury. Ryan had insisted on ordering room service, proper food, he'd said, not airline pretzels, and now an absurd amount of it covered the dining table. Hillary slept soundly in the adjoining bedroom, monitored by a private nurse Ryan had hired within an hour of landing. Dave sat on the edge of an armchair that probably cost more than his family's monthly rent, holding a plate of food he was trying not to devour too quickly. Ryan watched him with an expression that made Dave uncomfortable, like he was being studied, assessed. "I have a proposition for you," Ryan said finally, setting down his own barely touched plate. Dave's shoulders tensed. Here it comes, he thought. The polite dismissal, maybe with a check attached. "Thanks for your help. Here's some money. Have a nice life." "I'm in London for the next 2 weeks," Ryan continued. "Series of meetings, conference presentations, networking events. Normally I'd have brought my assistant, but she's dealing with a family emergency back home." He leaned forward, his intensity almost unsettling. "I want you to stay. Work with me. Be my right hand during these meetings." Dave nearly choked on his food. "What?" "Mr. Calloway, I'm not qualified for that. I don't know anything about business or—" "You know how to observe. How to identify patterns. How to problem solve under pressure." Ryan's voice was firm, assured. "I watched you with Hillary. You didn't panic, didn't second-guess yourself. You assessed the situation and acted. That's a skill most people spend years trying to learn." He paused. "I'll pay you $5,000 for the 2 weeks. Plus all expenses, of course." The number hit Dave like a physical blow. $5,000. That was 4 months of warehouse wages. That was community college tuition for a year. That was groceries and rent and maybe, finally, that breathing treatment machine Maya's doctor had recommended. "I can't," Dave heard himself say, though every cell in his body screamed at him to say yes. That's too much. That's charity." "It's not charity." Ryan's tone sharpened slightly. "It's payment for services rendered. You think I'd offer this to just anyone? Dave, in the past 12 hours, you've demonstrated more practical intelligence than half the people I employ. This is a job offer. A legitimate one." Dave set down his plate, his appetite suddenly gone. His pride warred with his desperation, with the knowledge of what that money could mean for his family. "People are going to think I'm some kind of charity case. That I'm taking advantage of. Let them think what they want." Ryan stood, pacing to the window. "I don't make decisions based on what other people think. I make them based on value. And you, Dave, have shown me you have extraordinary value." The words should have felt good. Instead, They made Dave's chest tight. He thought of his mother, working herself to exhaustion, never accepting handouts from anyone. He thought of the neighborhood kids who'd taken the easy money from corner dealers, sacrificing their futures for quick cash. He'd always sworn he'd be different, that he'd earn everything he got. "It's not just the 2 weeks," Ryan said, turning back to face him. The city lights behind him created a halo effect that seemed almost prophetic. "I want to mentor you, Dave. Teach you things that aren't in textbooks, how to negotiate, how to read people, how to turn ideas into reality. You want to be a doctor? Fine. But the business skills I can teach you will make you 10 times more effective at it." Dave's hands clenched into fists. "Why?" The question came out harder than he intended. "Why me? You don't know me. For all you know, I could." "You could what? Steal from me? Disappoint me?" Ryan smiled, but there was steel underneath it. "Dave, I've built a company worth $3 billion. I didn't get there by being naive. I'm a good judge of character, and I know potential when I see it." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "I also know what it's like to have doors closed in your face because of where you come from. To have people make assumptions about what you're capable of." "You." Dave couldn't help the skepticism in his voice. This man in his tailored suit, with his private nurses and hotel suites, had faced closed doors? "My father was a factory worker in Detroit," Ryan said quietly. "Died when I was 15. Heart attack on the line. My mother cleaned houses to put food on the table. I went to college on scholarships and student loans that took me 10 years to pay off." He met Dave's eyes. "I know what you're feeling right now. The pride that says accepting help is weakness. The fear that taking this opportunity makes you someone you're not." Dave's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist it wasn't the same, but the understanding in Ryan's face stopped him. "Here's what I learned," Ryan continued. "Independence is admirable. But refusing help when it's genuinely offered? That's not strength. That's just stubbornness. And it doesn't just hurt you, it hurts everyone depending on you." The image of Maya flashed in Dave's mind. Her small face during a seizure. Deshaun asking if they could afford the school field trip. Jamal wearing shoes 2 sizes too small because there hadn't been money for new ones. 2 weeks, Dave said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "And if I feel like it's not working, like I'm not actually earning it, then you walk away. No hard feelings." Ryan extended his hand. "Deal." Dave stared at the offered hand, knowing that accepting it would change everything. That once he crossed this line, there would be no going back to the simple certainty of his warehouse job and community college classes. He thought of his mother's tired eyes. Of Maya's journal, documenting every seizure. Of all the dreams he'd carefully locked away because dreaming felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. He took Ryan's hand. "Deal." Dave woke to unfamiliar softness. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place where he was. The sheets were too smooth, the mattress too comfortable, the silence too complete. Then memory flooded back. London. The hotel. Ryan's offer. The deal he'd shaken on. His phone showed 6:47 a.m. Back home, it would be 1:47 a.m., and he'd be halfway through his warehouse shift, his back aching from lifting boxes, his mind counting down the hours until he could get home to make breakfast for the kids. Instead, he was in a guest room that was larger than his entire apartment, staring at a ceiling he couldn't afford to replace if he accidentally damaged it. What had he done? A soft knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Dave? You awake?" Ryan's voice, already alert and energized. "Yeah, I'm up." Dave pulled on yesterday's clothes, his only clothes, he realized with a flash of embarrassment, and opened the door. Ryan stood in the hallway, dressed in running gear, looking like he'd already been up for hours. Probably had been. "Good. I'm heading out for a quick run. There's breakfast in the main room. Help yourself to whatever you want. We have our first meeting at 10. He paused, studying Dave's face. You sleep okay? Fine, Dave lied. Ryan's knowing smile suggested he saw through it, but he didn't push. We'll get you some clothes this morning. Can't have you meeting investors in the same outfit. He turned to leave, then stopped. Dave? You made the right choice. I know it doesn't feel like it yet, but you did. After Ryan left, Dave found the breakfast spread, pastries, fruit, coffee, juice, things he recognized and things he didn't. He made himself a plate, eating mechanically while his mind raced through everything that had changed in the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he'd been boarding a plane to London for a warehouse company's international training program. 3 days of learning new inventory systems, staying in whatever cheap hostel the company had arranged, then flying back home. A work trip, nothing more. Now he was in a suite that probably cost more per night than he made in a month, committed to 2 weeks with a billionaire who thought he had potential. The words sat uncomfortably in his chest. Potential meant expectations. Expectations meant the possibility of failure. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How's London, baby? The kids miss you already. Maya wanted me to tell you she's been seizure-free for 3 days. Love you. Dave's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How did he explain this? That he'd met a billionaire on a plane, helped his sick kid, and now was working for him? It sounded like a fairy tale. Or a scam. London's good, he typed finally. Something unexpected came up, a job opportunity. Might be here longer than planned. We'll explain later. Tell Maya I'm proud of her. Love you all. He hit send before he could overthink it, then immediately regretted not being more specific. But what could he say that wouldn't sound insane? Ryan returned 40 minutes later, showered and dressed in casual business attire that somehow looked both effortless and expensive. Ready? He asked. For what? Shopping. Then I want to brief you on today's meeting. Ryan grabbed his wallet and phone. And Dave? Stop looking so terrified. You're not going into battle. You're going into a conference room with people who, frankly, aren't half as interesting as you are. The shopping trip was surreal. Ryan took him to a tailoring shop in Mayfair where the staff knew him by name and treated Dave with a deference that felt deeply wrong. 3 suits, they decided. Shirts, ties, shoes, casual clothes for evenings. Dave tried not to calculate the cost, but his warehouse worker brain couldn't help it. Each suit probably cost more than everything he'd ever owned combined. Consider it a uniform, Ryan said when he saw Dave's expression. Would you expect a construction worker to buy his own hard hat? This is the same thing. Tools of the trade. Back in the hotel, Ryan spread documents across the dining table. Today's meeting is with a venture capital firm. They're considering investing in a biotech startup I'm advising. Your job is simple: observe. Watch how people interact, what they emphasize, what they avoid. Take notes if you want, but mostly just pay attention. What am I looking for? Dave asked, genuinely curious now despite his nerves. Patterns, Ryan said, and Dave heard the echo of his own words from the plane. Everything comes down to patterns. Who defers to whom? Who's really making decisions versus who's just posturing? Who asks smart questions versus who asks questions to sound smart? He leaned back, studying Dave. You already know how to do this. You've been doing it your whole life, reading situations, figuring out who to trust, how to navigate complex social dynamics. This is just a different context. Dave thought about his neighborhood, about knowing which corners to avoid, which guys were actually dangerous versus which ones were just loud. About reading his mother's face to know if they could afford takeout that week. About understanding Maya's pre-seizure signs before she even knew something was wrong. Maybe Ryan was right. Maybe he did already know how to do this. One more thing, Ryan said, his tone shifting to something more serious. I'm not doing this out of pity, and I'm not doing it to feel good about myself. I'm doing it because I believe you're capable of extraordinary things, and I want to see what happens when someone gives you the resources to prove it." He met Dave's eyes directly. "But you have to believe it too. If you walk into that meeting thinking you don't belong there, everyone will see it. So decide right now, do you belong there?" Dave's first instinct was to say no, to list all the reasons why a kid from West Baltimore had no business in a venture capital meeting. But then he thought about everything he'd already overcome. Every night he'd stayed awake studying while his siblings slept. Every time he'd figured out solutions that doctors with decades of experience had missed. Every choice he'd made to be more, to do more, to refuse the limitations his circumstances tried to impose. "Yeah," he said finally, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I belong there." Ryan's smile was genuine, proud even. "Good. Then let's go show them what you've got." The first week passed in a blur of conference rooms and handshakes, of names Dave would never remember and conversations conducted in a language he was still learning to speak. Business speak, Ryan called it, the art of saying much while revealing little. Dave sat in the corner of yet another meeting, his new notebook filled with observations. The German investor who touched his watch every time he lied. The woman from the pharmaceutical company who asked the sharpest questions but was consistently talked over by her male colleague. The venture capitalist who checked his phone whenever someone else was speaking, signaling his disinterest more clearly than words ever could. "What did you notice?" Ryan asked afterward, as they walked back through Mayfair's elegant streets. "The German guy's going to pull out," Dave said. "He's already decided. This whole meeting was just courtesy." Ryan stopped walking. "How do you know that?" "The watch thing." And he kept using past tense when talking about the project. "That would have been interesting," instead of, "that will be interesting." He's already mentally moved on. A slow smile spread across Ryan's face. "Took me 6 years of business school and another 5 in the field to start catching things like that." He resumed walking. "You're doing it instinctively." Back at the hotel, Hillary was awake and playing with building blocks under the nurse's watchful eye. His coordination had improved noticeably since the seizure on the plane. The medication adjustment Ryan's London specialist had recommended was working. "Dave." Hillary's face lit up when he entered. The boy had attached himself to Dave with the innocent completeness of childhood affection. "Hey, little man. What are we building?" "A castle. 4 nights." Hillary held up a crooked tower. "Will you help?" Dave glanced at Ryan, who nodded. "Go ahead. I have some calls to make." As Dave settled onto the floor, helping Hillary stack blocks, he felt the familiar discomfort ease slightly. This, caring for someone, solving immediate problems, this he understood. The business meetings, the luxury, the constant feeling of wearing someone else's skin, that was still foreign. But this moment, this simple act of building towers with a 6-year-old, reminded him why he'd said yes. Not for the money, though his family desperately needed it. Not for the experience, though it was invaluable. But because somewhere in Ryan's offer had been an unspoken recognition that Dave's life, his skills, his very existence had worth beyond what circumstances had assigned to it. The breakthrough came during a meeting Ryan hadn't even wanted Dave to attend. It was day 9, and they were in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Thames. Ryan sat across from 3 executives from a pharmaceutical company, discussing a potential partnership for Hillary's Epilepsy Research Foundation, a project Ryan had started years ago, pouring millions into finding better treatments for pediatric seizure disorders. Dave sat in his usual corner, notebook open, observing. The challenge, the lead executive was saying, is compliance. Parents don't consistently administer medications. They miss doses, they stop treatment when symptoms improve, they don't track side effects properly. It compromises our clinical trial data. Ryan nodded, frustration evident in his tight jaw. Dave had learned to read these subtle tells. This was a problem Ryan had been wrestling with for months. What if the problem isn't the parents? Dave said quietly. The room went silent. All eyes turned to him. Ryan's expression was unreadable. Go on. Dave's heart hammered, but he continued. I mean, you're asking parents who are already stressed and exhausted to remember precise dosing schedules, watch for side effects, keep detailed journals. Most of them are working multiple jobs, dealing with other kids, barely keeping it together. He thought of his mother, of the medical forms she brought home that she was too tired to fill out properly. You're not dealing with a compliance problem. You're dealing with a capacity problem. The pharmaceutical executives exchanged glances. One, a woman named Dr. Chun, leaned forward. What would you suggest? Dave felt Ryan's encouraging gaze. Make it easier. Like way easier. What if there was an app that sent reminders, tracked doses automatically, had a simple button to log side effects? What if it connected directly to the doctor so they could see real-time data? And what if, he hesitated, then pushed forward, what if families got paid for participation? Not a lot, but enough to compensate for their time and make it feel less like charity and more like partnership. The silence stretched. Dave's stomach dropped. He'd overstepped. These were executives with decades of experience, and he was a kid from Baltimore who'd been in the business world for barely a week. Then Dr. Chun smiled. That's brilliant. Why haven't we thought of that? Because we're not the ones living it, Ryan said quietly, his eyes still on Dave. We design from the top down. Dave's showing us how to design from the ground up. After the meeting, Ryan pulled Dave aside in the hallway. Where did that come from? I don't know. It just seemed obvious. Dave shifted uncomfortably under Ryan's intense scrutiny. Was it okay that I spoke up? I know I'm just supposed to observe. Dave. Ryan's hand landed on his shoulder. That single insight might have just saved a multi-million-dollar research program. The pharmaceutical company has been ready to pull their funding because of enrollment issues. You just gave them a solution. He paused. This is what I've been waiting to see. Not you mimicking what I do, but you bringing your own perspective. Your own genius. I'm not a genius, Dave protested. No, you're something better. You're someone who understands what it's like to live in the gaps between what the system offers and what people actually need. That's invaluable. Ryan's expression turned thoughtful. I want to try something. Tomorrow, I have a meeting about a healthcare logistics startup. Instead of just observing, I want you to participate. Ask questions, offer ideas. Be a full part of the conversation. Fear and excitement warred in Dave's chest. What if I say something stupid? Then you'll have said something stupid in a room full of people who've all said stupid things before. Ryan's smile was encouraging. Dave, you've spent your whole life solving impossible problems with no resources. Imagine what you could do with actual resources behind you. That night, Dave couldn't sleep. He lay in the expensive sheets, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider before. What if Ryan was right? What if his experience, the very circumstances he'd always seen as limitations, was actually his greatest asset? For the first time, he let himself truly imagine it, not just surviving, not just getting by, but actually building something. Creating solutions. Making a difference beyond his own family. The thought was terrifying. It was also thrilling. On the final day in London, Ryan took Dave to a small cafe near the hotel. Nothing fancy, just strong coffee and quiet conversation. Hillary was with the nurse, giving them time alone. I've been thinking, Ryan began, stirring sugar into his espresso, about what happens when we get back to Boston. Dave's chest tightened. Here it was, the end of the fairy tale. 2 weeks, as promised. He'd have his $5,000 and memories of a world he'd briefly visited. Yeah, I figured we should talk about that. I don't want this to end. Ryan's directness was something Dave had come to appreciate. No games, no false politeness. I want to bring you on permanently. Not as an assistant, as a partner in a new venture. Dave's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. What? I'm launching a healthcare innovation firm. We'll identify gaps in the system, like you did with the clinical trial compliance issue, and develop solutions. Technology, policy advocacy, direct care models. Things that actually help people instead of just generating profit. Ryan leaned forward. I need someone who understands both worlds. Someone who's lived the problems we're trying to solve. That's you, Dave. I'm 18, Dave said weakly. I don't have a degree. I don't. You'll get the degree. I'll cover tuition, full ride, any school you want. You'll work part-time with the company while you study. And Dave, Ryan's voice softened, I'll make sure your family is taken care of. Not charity. A signing bonus, a relocation package to get them out of that neighborhood if they want, health insurance that actually covers Maya's treatments properly. Dave's throat closed. He thought of his mother's exhausted face, of Maya's seizure journal, of Deshawn asking why they couldn't afford new shoes. Why? The word came out rough. Why are you doing this? Ryan was quiet for a moment, gazing out the window at London's morning rush. My father died on a factory floor because he couldn't afford to take time off when he felt chest pains. He knew something was wrong, but he had bills to pay, a family to feed. So he kept working until his heart gave out. He turned back to Dave, and his eyes held old pain. I built my company, made my fortune, but I've never been able to shake the feeling that I'm supposed to do something more. Something that would have saved my father. And then I met you. Someone with the intelligence and drive to change systems, not just navigate them. Someone who could have helped my father if he'd had the chance. Dave felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. I don't know if I can be what you think I am. You already are. Ryan extended his hand across the table. Partners. Dave looked at the offered hand, understanding that accepting it meant accepting a future he'd never dared imagine. It meant believing he deserved more than survival. It meant trusting that someone saw value in him beyond what he could immediately provide. He thought of his father, who'd left when things got hard. Of his mother, who'd stayed and fought. Of Maya, Deshawn, and Jamal, who deserved a brother who reached for more. He took Ryan's hand. Partners. 3 years later, Dave stood in the lobby of Callaway Healthcare Innovation, his reflection barely recognizable in the polished glass. The nervous teenager had been replaced by a confident young man in a tailored suit, earned, not given. His name was on the door now, right beside Ryan's, Callaway Morrison Healthcare Solutions. The company had launched with a simple mission: bridge the gaps between medical care and the people who needed it most. Dave's clinical trial app had been their first success, now used in 17 countries. But it was only the beginning. You ready? Ryan appeared beside him, holding 2 coffees, a ritual they'd maintained since London. As I'll ever be. Dave accepted the cup, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to announce. The press conference would unveil their newest venture, a network of community health centers in underserved neighborhoods, staffed by local residents trained through a program Dave had designed. Baltimore would be first. West Baltimore, specifically. His old neighborhood. Maya would be there today, seizure-free for 18 months thanks to a treatment protocol Dave had helped develop. His mother had quit her double shifts and now managed one of the health centers. Deshawn and Jamal were thriving in better schools. But the best part? The acceptance letter in Dave's pocket, Johns Hopkins Medical School, full scholarship, with permission to continue his work with the company part-time. My father would have loved to meet you, Ryan said quietly. Dave smiled, remembering the terrified kid on that plane. I think he did, in a way. Through you. They walked together toward the conference room, partners in every sense, bound not by circumstances, but by shared purpose. The future they were building would change everything.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.